Decision 82. NBC News continues its coverage of the 1982 elections. Here are Tom Brokaw and Roger Mudd.
Good evening. It's 11 o'clock in the East, and this is where we stand on our NBC News scoreboard in the House of Representatives. 268 Democrats, 167 Republicans, a net Democratic gain of 25. Probably, in fact, the highest first-term gain for the opposition party during the last 30 years. The ideological division in the House of Representatives, liberals 231, conservatives 204, for a net liberal gain of about 20 seats. And as Speaker O'Neill said this evening, we'll be hearing less and less of the boll weevils. The Senate looks like this: 18 Democratic senators, 9 Republican senators, for a net Democratic gain of 1 seat. The Democrats are now down to 4 states where they have a chance of picking up another seat or 2: Minnesota, Missouri, Nevada, and California. The governors are like this: 22 Democratic governors, 7 Republicans, for a net Democratic gain of 5 state capitals. Tom?
Roger, going into this election, we had the statistical averages of the last 30 years. It was about 12 for a first-term gain for the party that was not in the White House. And then the White House got us focusing on about 20 seats. But it does now appear that it's going to be greater than that. It's going to be about 25 seats based on our projections. Let us show you the difference in the House between what it was going into today and what it's going to be like in the next 2 years or so. These are the new numbers: 167 Republicans, 268 Democrats. To show you how significant a gain that is, quite dramatically now, let us show you the old House. As you can see, the Republicans dropped back considerably, and the Democrats added substantially to their margins. Now, it should have been a good year for Democrats. After all, the woes of the country under a Reagan administration are considerable. Unemployment of 10.1%, for example. Redistricting around the country, in which they redrew the congressional lines. Democrats picked up a gimme on that one of about 7 seats altogether. Nonetheless, it is a substantial and healthy gain for the Democrats tonight. Let us show you, if we can now, some races around the country that have been getting a lot of attention. In Illinois, in the 18th congressional district, about 30% of the precincts reporting there so far. Bob Michael, in the district that includes Peoria, and that means Caterpillar Tractor. Bob Michael, who is a Republican leader in the House of Representatives, in a very difficult fight, as you can see there, with G. Douglas Stevens, a young lawyer from the city of Peoria. We'll be watching that one all night long. President Reagan went out there and campaigned hard for Michael, and so did a lot of other well-known Republicans. In Oklahoma, a surprisingly close race in the 1st Congressional District. That's James Jones, who's the chairman of the House Budget Committee. He's in a closer race than we expected him to be, but it looks like he's now in a comfortable position with 84% of the precincts reporting at this hour. James Jones appears headed for re-election. We'll tell you as well what's going on in the state of Massachusetts. No question about what was going to happen there. That's Tip O'Neill. We just heard from him a few moments ago. A man who managed to control what must be his elation this evening. Also, in Texas, Jim Wright, who is the House Majority Leader, works very closely with Tip O'Neill as his right-hand man. More than half the precincts in thus far. Jim Wright with a comfortable margin in that race down there as well. The Republicans are not doing well where you would expect them not to do well. A lot of Republicans came in last time with Ronald Reagan on his coattails, so to speak. They were called Reagan's robots by House Speaker Tip O'Neill. Well, this time, many of those Republicans who had to go back to the industrial Midwest, to places like Ohio, for example, or to the Farm Belt in Iowa, where they had high unemployment and low corn prices, those Republicans first term just aren't doing very well tonight. They've lost seats in Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. 13 Republican freshman incumbents, 10 losses in the open seat category. 4 of the Gypsy Moths who voted with the Democrats are going down. Out in Colorado, a race that got a lot of attention, former astronaut Jack Swigert, who had to acknowledge that he was seriously ill in the course of the campaign. He is in a newly created district and running a very strong race now against Steve Hogan, Swigert leading by an almost 2-to-1 margin. So that's how it looks in the House of Representatives right now. John Chancellor has been poring over the NBC News poll all night long over in his analyst corner.
I've also been looking at the Illinois delegation, and Paul Findley, in whose campaign the Palestine Liberation Organization is playing. And 36% of the vote is in there, Tom, and he's behind a little bit. He's behind about 47 to 53% of the vote. The 36% of the precincts are in, so we'll have to wait on that to see what happens. We were talking earlier about the fact that the president seems reasonably popular for a midterm president. He's about in the Gallup poll where Jimmy Carter was in 1978. But the fact that his personality alone may not be absolutely enough. Our voter poll has provided more evidence today that the president's popularity doesn't ensure a Republican vote for the Congress. Voters who told us they approve of Reagan's performance as president, the number of who voted for Republican candidates today for Congress, that's 74%. Those are people who like Reagan. They went 74% Republican. But the number who voted for Democrats is 20%. So every fifth voter who gives Reagan, Mr. Reagan, good to excellent marks for his job, voted to send a Democrat to Congress. And that is one of the reasons why we have been able to project the fact that 25 additional Democratic seats will be in the new Congress, we believe. The president himself, although generally popular around the country, was not able to guarantee to everyone who was running on the Republican ticket that his popularity would affect them. Now, of course, this has a lot to do with the fact that in some districts, people don't know the Republican congressman. It has to do with the fact that in some districts, the Republican congressman is just no good. Bad candidates had something to do with that. There are, in fact, jerks running in both the Democratic and the Republican Party this year.
I think they're called turkeys, John.
What's that, Roger?
They're called turkeys or wimps.
They're called turkeys. But nonetheless, Reagan's popularity wasn't a guarantee this year for a Republican candidate getting those votes. Judy Woodruff has more now. Judy?
One of the things you've been talking about, John, tonight is how well the president and how well Republicans have been doing with women voters this year. The results that NBC's poll has produced tonight and polls that we've been seeing over the last few months indicate that women seem to prefer Democrats more than ever before. We've invited Rannie Cooper into our NBC studios in Washington. Rannie Cooper is the director of the Women's Campaign Fund. It's a political action committee that is devoted to getting women elected to public office and also examining the impact of the women's vote. Ms. Cooper, what do you see in tonight's results? What do they tell you about how women are doing with the Democrats versus the Republicans?
Well, certainly in terms of candidates, women candidates, so it's a little too early to tell. A lot of our candidates are in the western part of the country, and the returns, of course, are just coming in. As far as the women voter, the gender gap, again, we haven't had time to look at the exit polls and to analyze it, but my guess is that we're going to be seeing much of what we had anticipated in the polling data, and that's that women have played a significant role in perhaps these, in some of these close races where the Democrats are indeed winning.
You mentioned, let's back up a little bit, you did mention the candidates. It doesn't look like the women candidates, at least the ones who were getting the most attention nationally, were doing as well as I know you might have hoped.
Well, certainly the loss of Millicent Fenwick is very disappointing. Harriet Woods, however, is running a very close campaign in Missouri and for the U.S. Senate. And when we consider that literally 2-3 months ago she was 26 points down in the poll, and I don't think really any political analyst in Missouri gave her a chance of winning, except maybe the women's organizations, she's really done phenomenally well.
Maybe we should clear something up about what is popularly called the gender gap. I think some people think that women make up their minds on who they're going to vote for and what position they're going to take on an issue based largely on what are called traditional women's issues, the Equal Rights Amendment, abortion, and so forth. But as a matter of fact, we're finding that it's the economy as much as anything else.
That's right. It really has proven to be economic issues, war peace issues, the nuclear freeze, even some environmental issues. I often refer to them as quality of life issues, issues perhaps that affect our lives and the lives of future generations. And perhaps that's why women are tending to look at those issues more carefully, caring about the generations to come.
Why do you think the gender gap just showed up in a significant way after the election of Ronald Reagan?
Well, I think it's been a long time in coming, and in fact there's some polling data that would indicate that it's since the mid-70s we've seen it coming, and it's always really been there on the whole issue of force, the war-peace issue. It's been there for a number of years.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think women just tend generally to not look at force as a solution, that they would rather be perhaps more conciliatory. They would rather find other solutions before resorting to force.
Thank you, Randy Cooper
Thank
with
you.
the Women's Campaign Fund for joining us this evening. Roger Mudd.
Well, let's see. We're reporting now that the Democratic Party has a diminishing chance of picking up many more seats. It is enjoying a net gain of 1. And the big new face, 2 new faces in the Senate for the Democratic Party, Frank Lautenberg in New Jersey and young Jeff Bingaman, the Democratic Attorney General in New Mexico, who tonight defeated Harrison Schmitt. That leaves 4 states where there are true contests. Nevada, Howard Cannon, the Democratic incumbent. Minnesota, Dave Durenberger, the Republican incumbent. In Missouri, the Republican incumbent Danforth. And in California, and the first returns are beginning to come in there now. Let's take a look, if we can, at the so-called Reagan influence in the United States Senate. He did some traveling in the last several weeks of the campaign. He went to Wyoming and helped his party's nominee, Malcolm Wallop, get reelected. He went to Utah and helped his party's nominee get reelected, Orrin Hatch. He went to Montana and did not help. Democrat John Melcher returned to office, defeating Larry Williams. He went to New Mexico and did not help. Harrison Schmitt went down to defeat the winner there, Jeff Bingaman, the Attorney General. And if we take a look now at the raw vote in Missouri, you will see how close it is, with 75% of the precincts reporting 50-50. Danforth with a lead of about 1,200 votes. That is as close as you can be. Danforth, 433,000. Mrs. Harriet Woods, just 2,500 votes less than that.
Tom? We have some very close governor's races going on around the country as well tonight. We'll be hearing more about them in the coming days, of course, but let us show you what's going on, for example, first in the state of Texas, where they've had a boy howdy race going on down there for about 9 months.
A what?
A boy howdy race. I mean, they look at that race and say boy howdy. I don't come from Texas, but that's my guess. Well, I'll be hearing from them if they don't.
You have that on a 3x5 card?
I do have that on a 3x5 card, yes. It was mailed to me. Can we see Texas, or have we seen it? The results in Texas. There they are, 54% of the precincts in. Mark White is a Democrat Attorney General in a traditional Democratic state. Bill Clements is the Republican incumbent. Some of his own people have said that he may be just too nasty for Texas. Texans like to be governed and entertained, but he gives them almost too much entertainment with his abusive, abrasive fashion. As he said to a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, well, I wasn't raised in no jelly bean factory. He's a tough guy. That reporter was L. Hunt. In Nebraska.
Who's he?
42% of the precincts reporting in Nebraska so far. Charles Stone is the Republican incumbent, trailing now John Kerry. We'll be hearing more about Mr. Kerry, I'm sure, in the coming months because he's a Congressional Medal of Honor winner. He made a pretty healthy chunk of change in the restaurant business, decided to get involved in Democratic Party politics this time, and he's attracted a lot of attention out there. President Reagan went out to campaign, in fact, for Stone. It is Bob Kerry. He's just 39 years old. He's run marathons, and he has only part of one leg. 42% of the precincts reporting there. In Alabama tonight, we reported very early on that George Wallace, our projected winner, more than 2/3 of the votes in, as you can see, George Wallace, the projected winner, an unprecedented 4th term in that state. And a few moments ago, he made a statement to some of his supporters at his headquarters in Montgomery.
I would like to ask the people of Alabama tonight, those that did not support me, to join with those that did and help us together attack the problems that affect Alabamians adversely. We have an economic recession in this country, and I want to congratulate my opponent and tell Mayor Farmer that he ran a splendid race. He's a very formidable opponent, and I would like for those that supported him to now join us in helping to bring and build a better Alabama. This is really the night. This is really the night that I need my voice, but it's a night I don't have it.
That's Alabama Governor George Wallace. We projected him the winner tonight, and he, in fact, has been elected in Alabama to his 4th term down there. We have an update on that Bob Michel race out in Illinois, by the way. He is the Republican leader in the House of Representatives. 1/3 of the precincts now in. Michel now has a 2 percentage point lead over G. Douglas Stevens, who's his Democratic challenger. But that's going to be a tough race, according to our experts, who are watching all of these various signals that are coming out of the 18th Congressional District in Illinois. We're beginning to get some returns in California, just a few right now. In fact, it doesn't even add up to 1 full percentage point in the race between George Deukmejian and Tom Bradley. Tom Bradley attempting to become the first black elected governor in this country. We've only got about 14,000 votes altogether. That's going to be a long evening because it's expected to be quite close. In the closing days of the campaign, the polls came down to 5 or 6 points is all. We have standing by in California tonight at the Bradley headquarters, NBC News correspondent George Lewis. George, any clues out there that you're getting that we're not getting here in New York?
Yeah. Well, the Bradley people seem to be awfully confident, Tom. They think there's been a heavy turnout of all voters today, which traditionally in California works in favor of Democrats. They're also predicting that there has been a heavy turnout among the minorities, which would work in Mr. Bradley's favor. The most recent polls here in California showed that among black voters, among Hispanics, and among Orientals, Bradley led by quite a wide margin, whereas he was trailing in the polls among white voters. So that minority turnout is going to be key to whether Bradley wins or loses this election.
In the closing days of the campaign, the poll gap between them dropped fairly dramatically, George. Tom Bradley had a lead.
Talking about the campaign manager for Bradley's opponent, George Deukmejian, mentioned that, brought it out in public, and was later fired or later forced to resign by the Deukmejian camp for noting that there might be a negative vote among whites. No one is quite sure whether this factor is going to be very important. There are some indications, early indications, that whites are pretty much voting along the lines that the polls had indicated, but it's really too early to tell with any reliability.
All right, thank you very much, George Lewis of the Bradley headquarters in California tonight. The registration edge out there is 5-3, Democrats, 2 Republicans. Tom Bradley, well known in the southern part of the state, where you have to do well to win statewide. Mayor of Los Angeles, of course, city councilman in Los Angeles, former policeman there. But then one can never predict what the ethnic factor will be. Take the state of New York tonight, where Mario Cuomo, the Democrat and of Italian heritage, ran against Lou Lehrman, a Jewish Republican. Lehrman got slightly more Italian-American votes than Cuomo, according to our poll, and Cuomo got more than 2/3 of the Jewish vote altogether. So as I say, you cannot be too simplistic. It really has to do more with philosophy than it does with ethnic background.
Don't you think that's good?
Yes, of course I think it's good.
I mean, I think it's marvelous that people aren't trapped in ethnicity and that they can vote their
my guess
concerns.
We have to get to Roger.
Well, we don't have to. I'd like to talk to ethnicity. This is the first time I've ever said it out loud, John.
Well, you did it very well, Roger.
Well, you
Try it again.
You talked about eclectic earlier. I thought ethnicity was next.
Ethnicity. Well, talk about simple-minded interpretations. One interpretation that everybody made, for instance, tonight in Virginia, was that Dick Davis, because he looked conservative, white hair, mortgage banker, how could a man like that be a mean old liberal? He therefore was going to win. The White House very nervous. Really, in the last couple of days, had given up on Paul Tribble.
The white hair factor did not play.
The white-haired factor didn't play. But Paul Tribble is young and thought to be rather brash. Had not worked long enough in the vineyards, they said. He should wait a little while longer before he moved on to higher office. Tonight, Paul Tribble is the new senator from Virginia. Ken Bodie is at his headquarters at the John Marshall Hotel. Ken in Richmond, is that where you are?
That's where I am, right here at where they're doing the Republican version of the boogie when that band starts again.
How did Tribble do it, Ken?
Well, it seems to have been the suburbs, Roger. The suburbs make up about 44% of this state. They were very substantially undecided going into the last week or two of this election. They were conservative independents and moderate Republicans, according to the Tribble folks, that they were worried about. They put a blitz on, spent nearly $500,000 in the last 10 days or so in this election, and they convinced them to stay the course.
And what happened? I heard your reports earlier from the Flamingo Club talking to black leaders and the crusade for votes. What happened to the black vote tonight, Ken?
The black vote was 10-1 for Davis. And every black leader that we talked to in this state said it was substantially an anti-Reagan vote more than an anti-tribal vote. That really they were deciding on the president's programs and the effects of the president's programs on them.
Now, give me a quick read on the political fortunes of Governor Robb. He had committed himself totally to Davis. Obviously, Robb is interested in moving on beyond Virginia. What does this defeat do to him?
Well, I think probably it diminishes his aura as a party leader, which was very, very high after his victory last year. And in that victory, by the way, 95% of the black vote went to Governor Robb. Robb did throw everything behind Davis in this campaign. He campaigned very hard for him at the end, and it looked as if it was going to work for him. It just didn't. Paul Tribble's the senator.
So now Virginia's got 2 Republican senators and I guess, what, probably 8 out of 9 House members and the most conservative delegation in Congress, isn't it?
Roger, that's not quite clear. There are 3 Republicans that are being threatened in this state. At all different corners of the state, Republicans are being threatened. 3 districts right now. They're 9-1 Republican going into this election. They may come out a little different than that. And by the way, these Republicans in this state are very much Reagan Republicans. Down the line, stay the course Republicans.
Okay, Ken. Thank you very much. We'll be back in a moment.
Decision 82. NBC News and the NBC affiliates across the country continue their coverage of the 1982 elections. Here is NBC News correspondent Judy Woodruff.
In the Northeast tonight, the Democrats scored some pretty impressive victories in some close races. In the New York governor's race, NBC News projects Mario Cuomo the winner over Lou Lehrman. In the New Jersey Senate race, our projection shows Frank Lautenberg, the Democrat, edging out Millicent Fenwick. An NBC News poll shows that in large part, many traditional Democratic voters who supported Republicans 2 years ago in 1980 have returned to the Democratic fold this year. Nationally, 60% of the blue-collar voters supported Democratic House candidates in 1978. But 2 years ago, in 1980, only 54% of the blue-collar vote went to the Democrats. Well, this year, the blue-collar vote for the Democrats is back up to 58%. Catholic voters traditionally also vote Democratic, and an NBC News poll shows that their performance is almost identical to blue-collar voters. In 78, 60% of the Catholic voters supported the Democratic candidates for the House. In 1980, that dropped down to 53%. But this election year, 1982, is seeing 59% of the Catholic voters going back to the Democrats. In his race for governor of New York, Mario Cuomo had to beat New York City Mayor Ed Koch to get the nomination. He did it by holding the old Democratic coalition together, and he used the same strategy in his campaign in the general election against Republican Lou Lehrman. We have a report from Steve Delaney at Cuomo headquarters.
Judy, this is one of those elections in which the Democratic candidate Mario Cuomo, although it came late in the evening, has done what Democrats need to do to win a statewide race in New York. He has put together the parts of the Democratic coalition that are important in urban politics: blacks, ethnic voters, labor, the urban ethnic complex of votes and ideologies that has always meant victory for those who could put it together. In winning this one, Mario Cuomo has vindicated the idea that he has experience which cannot be bought. His opponent has been on television ever since the first of the year, and in some places around the state has run television ads 2 or 3 times as often as any of the most popular commercial products on the market. It was a long time coming. But Mario Cuomo, who was appointed to most of the offices that he's held, has finally gotten to the place now where he can say in truth that he is going to be the next governor of the state of New York. He hasn't come down yet. Mr. Lehrman has not conceded. And the people in this ballroom, which is just absolutely packed, are waiting for an excuse to have a real old-fashioned Democratic victory party. Shouldn't be long coming now, Judy.
Thank you, Steve Delaney. With us in our Washington, or rather, in Washington with John Dancy are two people who I think will have something to say about the blue-collar vote coming back to the Democrats, and that's Bob Strauss and Senator Robert Dole. Gentlemen, let me ask you, Mr. Ambassador, are you seeing the blue-collar vote return to the Democrats in the numbers you expected?
Yes, I am. Matter of fact, I'm pleasantly surprised. I just commented to Bob Dole here that when I saw those numbers you just put up there, that's a good sign for the Democrats for now and for '84, I hope.
Senator Dole, what do you think?
Well, I think I think they are coming back. I said earlier we'd taken a bath in the House. I want to change that to a shower. Maybe a bath is a little too rough, but I feel a little better now because the Senate races are looking better. There's still 4 out. Looks to me we may end up with 53 or 54 Senate seats, so it's still going to be a pretty good battle in the Congress.
I think our friend Dole over here, Judy, was worried that Russell Long was going to throw him out of that chairman's chair and sit back down in there.
Let me ask
for a little while.
Let me ask you about 1984. What does this do to the Republicans' chances to hold on to the Senate in 1984 when you've got a lot more critical races coming up, Senator?
Well, I think it's going to be very difficult. I think in '74 there are 19 Republican incumbents and 14 Democrats, so the odds switch. I mean, we have the bigger class, and we have some very tough races in that group. But much will depend on the economy. The economy was an issue that worked against us in '82. It could be an issue that works for us in 1984. It could change not only the Senate, but, you know, we could make substantial gains in the House.
John, you talk about 1984. One of the big things I mentioned and wanted to mention was that a race like in Texas, where my good friend John White, who looks like he may be defeating Bill Clements. Matter of fact, I spoke down there. They say he has defeated him. I hope that's right. That is an important factor in '84.
Why is that such an important factor?
Well, a governor in a big state like Texas, and Texas traditionally, has a tremendous impact on what happens in a national election. You take in 1976, Jimmy Carter would never have carried Texas against Ford if it hadn't been for Dolph Briscoe, who was our governor then. And there's certain states where they really have a major impact. Speaking of that presidential politics, I'm surprised that none of you here say anything about Bob Dole. He's one of, he's a lot of folks' presidential candidate for 1984. I might be for him myself. That might hurt him.
Last time I asked him, he said he didn't know that the job was open.
Well, I don't think the job will be open, but with Strauss and I have a thing going. I'm going to manage his campaign. He's going to manage mine. But I think what we're seeing tonight is
let me interrupt you. We've got to go back to New York. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you, and we will be back with more of NBC's election coverage in just a moment.
Live from New York City, Decision 82. NBC News covers the 1982 elections. Brought to you by IBM. We're dedicated to the office, where it is now and where it will be. And by the calling card from Bell, for calling when you're away from your home or office. and by General Motors, the mark of excellence. Today, we're the best GM ever. Now reporting from the NBC News Election Center are Tom Brokaw and Roger Mudd.
Hello, once again, it's now 11:30 in the East, and polls have closed in most of the states across the country. We begin this half hour of our coverage now with a major call for you. We are projecting the race for governor of Texas. And the Democratic challenger, Mark White, NBC News projects as the winner there. That means that he beat Republican Bill Clements, the incumbent, and about $12 million that Clements spent in this race altogether. It was the single most expensive race in the country this year, $20 million spent in the race for governor of Texas between the two candidates. They were spending it on billboards, they were spending it on leaflets, television, radio, wherever you went, they were spending money down there. Bill Clements, the Republican who wanted desperately to win for Ronald Reagan, did not, in fact, based on our projection. Let's show you now what's been happening in other races around the country, the kind of composite score that we have accumulated at this hour. As you can see in the House of Representatives, we are projecting a significant Democratic gain of 25 seats. Roger, if you could, that's it. We both need to do that a little bit. Democrats going in tonight had 243 seats. We are now projecting that they will win 268 to the Republicans 167. That is a significant gain for the Democrats. It is a signal to the captain that he must change the course and not stay the course. And we'll be hearing more about that in the coming weeks on any number of issues. Philosophically, here's how it translates based on our analysis of how people have voted in the past and how they're likely to vote in the future. We thought generally going into tonight that there were more conservatives than liberals on most issues that the president took to the House of Representatives. We now think that the liberals have picked up about 20 seats, people who are more likely to be more critical of the president. So it's going to be tougher for him to do business up there in the future. And now let's show you what's going on in the Senate and in the governor's races as well. We're going to take a look at that, an accumulation of those races. First of all, in the Senate, Democrats have elected 20 tonight, the Republicans 9, for a net Democratic gain of 1. Some crucial races still out in the state of Missouri, in California, in Minnesota. The Democrats are going to come real close, but it is unlikely that they will regain control of the Senate. And among governors tonight, 36 are elected. Going into tonight, the Democrats controlled 20 of those state houses, the Republicans 16. So far tonight, we are projecting Democrats winners of 22 races, Republicans winners of 8. That means a net Democratic gain of 5. They could pick up some more, and that would be a very healthy evening for them in that category as well. Roger Mudd.
Tom, Lowell Weicker, who was reelected this evening from Connecticut, said after his victory statement over Toby Moffett, Toby Moffett is a class act. He's the best and toughest opponent I ever faced. As you get older, these things don't get any easier. That's Bob Kerr reporting from Hartford. A moment ago, when you said that these returns indicated that the Reagan administration would have to change the course rather than stay the course, I watched on the monitor the face of Jim Baker, the White House Chief of Staff, and he broke into a big grin. So I want to ask Mr. Baker, who's with Chris Wallace at the White House, Mr. Baker, are you going to change the course rather than stay it now that you've taken what Bob Dole calls a bath in the House?
Well, Roger, I'm not sure we would, as I said earlier, we admire Senator Dole and we work closely with him as chairman of the Finance Committee, but I'm not sure that we would agree we've taken a bath in the House. In the first place, we don't really know what the number of seats lost are, and we realize you're projecting 25. A lot of people said that 19 would be a win for us. I don't see how 6 seat difference makes a bath. So we have to wait and see.
What he did, Mr. Baker, in all fairness to Senator Dole, he changed it to shower.
But isn't it going to be, in fact, Mr. Baker, isn't it going to be awfully hard for you to maintain your working coalition in the House if, as we project, you lose 25 seats, and if, particularly, if 20 of those Democratic gains are liberals?
Well, we're going to have to see, number one, Chris, what the gains are, and secondly, who they are. We're going to have to sit down and see what their records are and what their prior statements are with respect to whether or not they might support the president's programs. It's obviously going to make it a little tougher to pull that coalition together. Just how much tougher, we just have to wait and see. You know, when we took office, though, in 1981, nobody thought we'd be able to do anything in the House because it was dominated by Democrats, and yet we showed that we were able to work with some of those Democrats who were philosophically attuned to the president's program.
If you lose seats in the governors, if you lose senators, if you lose 25 seats in the House, isn't that to some degree a repudiation of the president and of Reaganomics?
Well, in the first place, we're not losing senators yet. We're net 1 down. Now, you know, historically,
the party in power loses 2 or 3 seats in Senate races in the off year. As far as governorships are concerned, I think everyone's assumed all along that we would lose somewhere between 5 and 7 governorships. That's just as a result of the fact that there are a lot of incumbent Republicans who chose not to run again. So the real key is what happens in the House, and we still don't know.
Mr. Baker, this is Tom Brokaw in New York. I don't know whether you can hear me over the siren or not, but when you all came into office 2 years ago, we were being told that this was a sea change in American politics, that this is going to be a fundamental reform of the way people thought philosophically in this country tonight. And yet a lot of those Republicans that you brought in with you 2 years ago are going down the tubes tonight in the industrial areas where they were able to win 2 years ago. So isn't that an indictment of Reaganomics, truly spoken?
Well, I don't think so, Tom. A lot of those Republicans are not going down the tubes, and we're still, I think you'll find we'll be net gainers if you take 1980 and 1982. There'll be more people that we brought in with us that are here than there will be that are not. And, you know, as I've just pointed out, the president has beaten history and tradition. If indeed we do retain the Senate and only lose 1 seat, that would be in the face of history and tradition, which says we lose more than 1 seat in the Senate. So we've done well in the Senate. We may not have done quite as well in the House. We have to wait and see. I will say this, that in tough times, the average numbers of seats lost in the House are more like 46 or 48 seats when you have high unemployment or when you have unemployment that's greater than it was in the presidential election 2 years before.
You're going back to Grover Cleveland for that statistic.
No, I'm really not. I'm really not. I'm taking every race. I'm taking every race since 1900 and bringing it all the way up to 1980.
Eisenhower in 58 did that, but first term since the war, it's been around 11 or 12. As you
no, not if you don't measure it. Don't measure it by the first term. You measure it by the first term and the economic situation. And after all, what we've had to do this time has been in the face of some rather adverse economic news.
How many boll weevils can you fit on the head?
How many boll weevils what?
Yeah, we're about to call another race. You want to stand by and listen
Sure,
to me for a minute?
sure.
All right, in Minnesota, you've retained your Senate seat out there, according to our projections.
That's good. We thought we would, and that's wonderful.
David Durenberger.
What about Texas, though, Mr. Baker? You're a Texan. The president campaigned for Bill Clements. You're holding the convention in Dallas in 1984. It looks now like you've lost the governorship there.
Well, the jury's still out on whether we've lost it. I realize you've just projected it, but let me say this. There have only been 2 Republicans elected to statewide office in Texas in the history of that state. It is still a very Democratic state, very tough for Republicans, and this was always going to be a tough race. It obviously is a tough race.
If we can get back to the Reaganomics question, though, are you saying no changes in Reaganomics, fully stay the course on defense spending, on tax cuts, cuts in social spending?
What I'm saying is that the president has held the Senate, and he may have held it without any net loss. We have to wait and see. We've got some shots out in the West that we don't have any returns on yet, or meager returns, and it may be that we'll come out even, and so we got to take a look at that, and then we also have to see what these House losses translate into. It's a little bit premature to say what they're going to be.
Chris, I'm sorry, I think we have to keep moving on here.
Good. Thanks, Mr. Baker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baker. As your fellow Texan, Bob Strauss, on the other side of the aisle was saying, got to keep it in perspective. So we'll be hearing a lot about perspective in the next couple of days. Let us just bring you up to date on what happened in Minnesota if we can. NBC News now projecting that the winner in the Senate race out there, David Durenberger, the Republican incumbent, he was running against a man by the name of Mark Dayton from the department store chain, also related to the Rockefeller, spent about $7 million, wasn't it, Roger, of his own money?
Well, I think it seems to me it's more like 8.6 million is what it is.
Of his own dough?
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It was an awful lot of money, and he lost, according to our projections tonight. So that's good news, of course, for the Republicans that they hung onto the seat in Minnesota, and probably mildly bad news for Mr. Dayton's bank account. I don't know how big it is.
Well, what that is I think we were talking earlier about millionaires and the influence.
Yeah.
I think there's a regular backlash when you get that kind of money. Durenberger said that Mark Dayton's ads were on the television as frequently as McDonald's hamburgers. That if you sat at home and watched television, you'd see 35 ads by Dayton for every 1 ad paid for by Durenberger. That was the difference in the ratio.
Pretty significant.
Enormous.
We'll be back with continuing coverage of Decision 82 right after this.
Change velocity ratio, change data.
When General Motors talks about fuel economy,
It isn't just a lot of wind.
Stable at 95.
Although wind is involved, aerodynamics are tested here in 50-mile-an-hour winds because less wind resistance means more miles per gallon. This has helped GM double fuel economy since 1974.
That's a fact, and not just a lot of wind.
We're living up to our commitment. Right now, today, we're the best GM ever.
It's a funny time to ask, but did you look into those investments?
I asked my broker.
And?
Well, my broker is E.F. Hutton. And E.F. Hutton says that...
When E.F. Hutton talks, people listen.
Joey, the fastest way possible. Yes, sir. Atta boy.
Why send information to branch offices the hard way?
When are the price changes going out, Mary?
Right now.
When IBM has an office system that can speed information to all your business locations in minutes. Now, that's a lot easier, isn't it?
The boss says it's a rush.
Right.
When I'm not on the typewriter, I'm on the phone. I'm either writing about the sea or seeing about my writing, hurrying for a deadline or a phone line. This helps a lot, the calling card from Bell. It makes calling faster, easier, cheaper, and there's no charge for the card.
If you're on the phone a lot, it helps a lot. To order, call your telephone business office.
I use it everywhere I go. Well, almost everywhere.
We're back. Going into tonight, 36 governor's races at stake. Democrats controlling 20 of them, Republicans 16. Democrats have made it's late in the evening, Roger. I can't even say substantial.
Try ethnicity.
Yeah, substantial gains in the course of this evening. We want to show you now what has happened in a lot of big states around the country in the governor's races and where they stand tonight. So let's take a look at New York. First of all, Mario Cuomo, who knocked off New York City Mayor Ed Koch in the primary, goes on to win a very tight race against Lou Lehrman, who spent about $7 million of his own money in this race. But we are projecting Mario Cuomo the winner. That will stay in the Democratic column, Hugh Carey retiring. In Massachusetts, Mike Dukakis back in office as governor of that state after a bloody battle against Ed King, who had knocked him off 4 years ago. Dukakis won handily over John Sears, the Republican candidate. In Alabama, we've talked about this a lot tonight. George Wallace back for a 4th term. In the state of Michigan, it had been Republican Governor William Milliken. We are projecting James Blanchard, Democratic representative, as the winner tonight. In Ohio, James Rhodes, the governor for 16 years. Tonight, he is retiring. Dick Celeste, former lieutenant governor, former head of the Peace Corps, our projected winner, a Democrat. In Pennsylvania, Richard Thornburg, despite the problems in that state, and they are considerable with high unemployment and other difficulties, Richard Thornburg is generally thought of as a very competent manager, and he is a Republican, and he managed to hang on, according to our projection tonight. And in the state of Texas, we are projecting tonight that Mark White, the Democratic Attorney General, the winner over Republican incumbent Bill Clements, who said you elect White and you're bringing in Mondale and Kennedy and all those other liberal Democrats. But with 61% of the precincts reporting, Mark White with a pretty substantial lead down there. And governors become important in presidential years, especially because they can help presidential candidates when they come into those states for those big and important primaries, as you have them in places like Pennsylvania and Texas and in New York. And we are still awaiting what will happen in California tonight. Let us show you what is going on right now with the California vote. We have only scattered returns from that big state out there. 2% of the precincts reporting thus far. The pattern has always been in the past that they will come in from the rural areas first, and then they'll start to break in Alameda County, which is up around San Francisco in the Bay Area, and then down south. With 2% of the precincts reporting, George Deukmejian, the Republican Attorney General, holding an 8% lead over Tom Bradley, but we'll have millions of votes cast before the evening is out here. We may have to wait a while on that one because it has been a very close race right along. According to the polls, in the final 10 days or so, it tightened up considerably. Tom Bradley, the mayor of Los Angeles, hopes that he will set an historic precedent by becoming the tallest governor elected in California, as he's been saying. He would also, of course, be the first black. Roger, what's going on the Senate side?
Well, with the projected victory of David Durenberger in Minnesota, what that means is that it is no longer a mathematical possibility for the Democrats to recapture control of the Senate. They had to gain 5. They have gained exactly 1, and there are only 3 states left now where the race is not decided. There are a few places like Washington and Hawaii where the returns aren't in, but there's no contest. What you've got is California, Missouri, and Nevada, and that's what's left. So this is the Senate NBC News projection. 20 Democratic senators, 10 Republicans for a net Democratic gain of 1. And only 3 contested, really sharply contested states left: California, Missouri, and Nevada. So that's where we stand on the Senate. Incidentally, I mentioned a minute ago that there was perhaps a backlash in Minnesota because of the great amount of money that Mark Dayton had spent. Our voter polling out there indicates the contrary, that 54% of the Durenberg voters, the Republican voters, said that they voted for Durenberger because they liked his prior government experience. He's well-respected, well-collected fellow, smart, didn't hesitate to cast aspersions on President Reagan's intelligence, by the way. The voters said that money was not an issue one way or the other. So that indicates that well, I think what it indicates is that...
I think it indicates you were wrong a few minutes.
No, I think it indicates that I was more right than I thought I was. That if you have lots of money, and no experience, you'll go for somebody with the experience, so that money really doesn't buy it all the time.
You sound like Jim Baker trying to interpret the lead in the House of Representatives. I agreed with you, by the way. I think that people may not necessarily be truthful when talking about the money, but I think that they begin to think, how can he be wasting all that money, and how does he know the value of a dollar if he's spending that much just to get this job that pays $60,000 a year? We'll be back after this. I do agree with you, I think.
Now, from Buick and your participating Buick dealer, a remarkable opportunity. Right now, you can get 10.9 annual percentage rate financing when you buy any new 82 Buick. From the front-wheel drive Skyhawk, Skylark, Century, or Riviera to the Regal, LeSabre, or Electra. The selection is great, so grab this chance to spread your wings in a new 82 Buick at considerable savings. Get 10.9 annual percentage rate financing. Take retail delivery now through December 31st at your participating Buick dealer.
Sharp presents the genius of the keyboard, playing Sharp's new CS4800, the office calculator that performs like a computer. He performs difficult what-if projections instantly. Next, he performs on our remarkable calculator, Sharp's EL7050. It prints out 4-color charts and graphs brilliantly. Whatever your calculator needs, Sharp offers a very, very wide range. From sharp minds come sharp products.
I do a lot of weekend driving in pretty heavy traffic, and everything's riding on my Goodyears. These racing tires give me the kind of handling I need. And during the week, I count on Goodyear Street Radio, because on the track or off, I feel better with the blimp behind me.
Get the blimp behind you. Come up to Goodyear.
You don't have to be a hotshot driver to have a big following.
Normally, when trees are grown and replanted, there's only a 50% survival rate. But with these trees, there was a 95% survival rate, because these trees were grown underground in an environment ideal for plant growth. And an essential part of that environment were special Sylvania lights, which helped the young trees thrive.
Gee.
No, GTE.
A moment ago, we reported that there were 3 outstanding races for the Senate, and the Democrats now had no mathematical chance of capturing control. These are the 3 states still outstanding. In California, where the polls have just closed, returns are beginning to come in. Republican Mayor Wilson of San Diego with a slight lead over Democratic Governor Brown. In Missouri, look at these returns. 83% of the precincts in. Danforth and Woods, 50-50, 7,000 vote difference. 50-50. And in Nevada, the 3rd state, 11% of the precincts in. Chick Hecht is leading incumbent Democrat Howard Cannon, but not by much. Those returns are not yet significant. Those are the three states we'll be watching: California, Missouri, and Nevada. Now,
I was just checking on one of my favorite congressional candidates. I don't know him. I don't know what he stands for, except that he had some very good lines. Kurt Donaldson, who was running out in Nebraska, I think in the 1st congressional district. He's getting beat just terribly tonight, but he said, talking to a lot of farmers out there, he's got the perfect solution for low farm prices. He said, you do with wheat what they've done with marijuana. You make it illegal. It'll sell for $300 a bushel. But apparently the voters weren't going to go along with that. Where would you like to go now, to put it quite bluntly? All right, we'll be back after this.
Decision 82. NBC News and the NBC affiliates across the country continue their coverage of the 1982 elections. Here is NBC News correspondent Judy Woodruff.
So far tonight, some of the candidates who spent a lot of money are doing well, and some are not. In the Minnesota Senate race, Mark Dayton, who spent almost $6 million, a lot of money for that state, is not doing well. NBC News has projected his opponent, Republican Dave Durenberger, the incumbent, the winner. In the California Senate race, Pete Wilson and Jerry Brown both spent over $5 million. So far, very, very early returns, just 3% of the precincts reporting. Wilson is ahead, but it's still too early to say how that race is going to go. In the New York governor's race, Republican Lou Lehrman spent almost $11 million. NBC News projects, however, that his opponent, Democrat Mario Cuomo, will be the winner. In the Texas governor's race, maybe the biggest story of all tonight, for the big spenders, incumbent Bill Clements spent almost $12 million to no avail. NBC is projecting that his opponent, Democrat Mark White, will be the winner. Dan Molina is at Clements' headquarters, where he filed this report on Clements' spending.
While Republicans outspent Democrats all across the country during this campaign, here in Texas, typically they did it in big style. Republican William Clements, the governor, spent about $12 million in his bid for re-election. Clements had said at one point that he would spend as much money as it takes to get reelected. $12 million apparently wasn't enough if spending a lot of money is what it takes to win an election. His opponent, Attorney General Mark White, now apparently the victor, spent about $6 million in his campaign. It's worth noting that Governor Clements spent about $3 million just to win the minority vote here in Texas, and it appears that the minority vote has now gone heavily against him. This campaign very rarely got above the level of what might be called shrill. It certainly was very strident. There was very little discussion. Very infrequently was there a serious discussion of the issues facing this state. This is Dan Molina, NBC News, Austin.
Campaign spending is an issue of great concern to the organization called Common Cause, the citizens lobby based in Washington. The president of Common Cause, Fred Wertheimer, is in the NBC studio in Washington tonight. Thank you for coming in, Mr. Wertheimer.
Pleasure.
The big spenders don't seem to be doing very well this evening. What does that mean? Does that mean we're not going to be seeing as much money spent from now on?
Well, actually, they're doing very well, Judy. There have been a couple of races where they have lost, but of the 30 Senate races that you've called so far this evening,
In 25 of those races, the winners have outspent the losers probably by 2 to 1. Even in the Dayton race, where Mark Dayton outspent Senator Durenberger by 2 to 1, $6 million to $3 million, Senator Durenberger spent $1 million to win that seat 4 years ago. So 4 years later, he's had to spend 3 times as much to hold it. $600,000 of that came from special interest groups, and he's going to have to deal with those groups when he gets back to the Senate.
At the very least, though, we're seeing that spending a lot of money doesn't necessarily buy you a seat in the Senate.
It doesn't guarantee a seat. It never has. But overwhelmingly, those people who ran for the Senate tonight who spent more money will wind up winning. And we will see roughly 2/3 of the major party candidates who ran tonight for the Senate spending more than $1 million each. So money, it's not the only factor, obviously, but it's a big factor. Obviously, any candidate would rather have more of it than less, and the winners tonight are people who have wound up with substantially more than the losers.
Where is all this going to lead? I mean, are we just sort of on a never-ending spiral of spending more and more money? I mean, is there any way to slow it down? I know this is something Common Cause is interested in doing.
Well, we'd like to see it slow down. This election, House and Senate combined, will cost over $300 million, with special interest groups giving $80 million of that amount. I think it's going to lead to a change. There's been an explosion this year, and I basically think the country's going to say enough. We're going to be heading for some major campaign finance reforms in the next couple of years. It's totally out of control today.
Isn't it very difficult to get that through in the Congress, though? I mean, as we've seen from experience, the incumbents are the very ones who don't want to put restrictions on spending.
Well, it's very difficult indeed. If you look at those Senate races, of 30 incumbents who ran for re-election, 26 had outraised their opponents. So they benefit from the present system. And tend to fight against changing it. I think the public's going to insist on it. The presidential system was changed a few years ago when the public demanded a change because of Watergate. We are headed for another national scandal in the way our congressional campaigns are financed, and I think the public's going to insist on a change again.
Thank you, Fred Wertheimer, President of Common Cause, for joining us this evening. We just want to end on this one last note. The little spender for national office is probably Republican Clarence Brown. He's a retired businessman running for the Senate in Hawaii. He spent $477 of his own money, and that was it. The only outside contribution he got was a $25 check from somebody in Louisiana. That's all for now. We will be back with more of NBC's election coverage in a moment.
Thursday on Fame, Bruno's got a 10-year-old rival. Man.
Would you object to joining me in my hotel room for an afternoon of wild animal passion?
Sam jumps at a hot offer on Cheers. And on Taxi, the cabbies are being robbed.
I'm the thief!
Then a crazed prisoner attacks Joyce. Hill Street Blues, Thursday.
It's the best night of television on television.
Live from New York City, Decision 82. NBC News covers the 1982 elections. Brought to you by E.F. Hutton. When E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. And by Exxon Office Systems, where value is the most important word in word processing. Now reporting from the NBC News Election Center are Tom Brokaw and Roger Mudd.
Good evening. It's 12 o'clock midnight. We're here with Judy Woodruff and John Chancellor beginning our, sixth hour of coverage of Decision 82. The Senate race is all but decided in that the Democrats no longer have a chance to recapture control of the Senate. Let's take a look at our scoreboard to see where we stand. In the House of Representatives, 269 No, 268 Democrats elected, 167 Republicans, a net Democratic gain of 25 seats. The philosophical split, liberals 231, conservatives 204, a liberal gain of 20.